in the strategic domain. Today we will be exploring the roots of Indian statecraft. Good morning, officers. I, on behalf of the Commandant War College and Commander High Command Wing, welcome Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, PVSM, YSM, SM, retired. A former Army commander with over 4 decades of distinguished service in the Indian Army across a wide range of operational, ideational, and training assignments. In these assignments, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla made noteworthy contributions to the development of Indian strategic military futures, technological innovation, professional military education, capacity building, operational poise, and civil military fusion. A combat aviator and accomplished speaker, the officer has an abiding interest in strategic military affairs. He has published more than 60 articles in journals and prominent dailies. He has also lectured, participated in approximately 350 talks, seminars, events in India and abroad. In recognition of service of the most exceptional order, the officer was awarded the Param Vishesh Seva Medal on Republic Day 2021. He is a distinguished fellow at the Center for Land Warfare Studies and has been elected to the Executive Council of USI with effect from 1st January 23. The Honorable President was pleased to appoint Lieutenant General Raj Shukla to the UPSC on 18th July 2022. Without further ado, I now request the General to please carry on with his talk.
Okay, should I start?
Over to you, sir.
So, Commander, High Command Wing, Air Commodore Pannu, officers attending the HDOC 18. Good morning. A special word of greeting to officers from the friendly foreign countries. Great pleasure to be with you all. Thank you, High Command Wing, for both the opportunity and the invite. As you all know, I've been asked to explore the roots of Indian statecraft with you. So without getting into any deep theories, let me with some examples try and give you a sense of the profound wisdom contained in our cultural texts, ancient philosophies, especially with regard to issues pertaining to hard power, strategic policy, national security, and statecraft. These are of domains of interest to you and me. What I'm saying is that Indian culture is rich in many other dimensions, but we'll be focusing on hard power, statecraft, national security. And even here, may I suggest, both to the Indian officers and to the foreign officers, that the pantheon of Indian literature, best practices on the subject, is indeed rich, wide, and varied. It has got diverse, multiple facets. You may not agree with all of those facets, but they are certainly worth a study. May I also emphasize that, even as we tap into the wisdom of our ancient thought, it is extremely important that we apply our minds to repurpose them to modern times. For example, there is a war manual called the Yuddh Kandam, which talks of how force and diplomacy must merge in pursuit of national security interests. There are some similarities, but they were made for another era. So you have to intelligently repurpose them to modern challenges. Only then will those texts, those thoughts get acceptance, effectiveness, and relevance. So now that is our genius of how we adapt them to modern times. So essentially, it's common sense, but let me repeat it, that a nation that does not honor its past has no future. So it is extremely important to rigorously examine what our ancient texts tell us, what is their wisdom, and as I said, repurpose them to modern times. So we will be looking at the strategic military lens of the future, which is one which is anchored in the past. That is what I will try and do. Since the time is limited, it's not possible to go into every text So I will just try and give you a sprinkle of examples from varied texts to give you a sense of how our forefathers thought, what our civilizational outlook was, and how you could adapt it to modern times. We shouldn't forget that from the year 1 to 1820, year 1 to 1820 of recorded history, India and China were the two foremost economies and the two foremost civilizations. So if we are a civilization which has been a lead civilization for so many centuries together, it shouldn't surprise us that our ancient texts, traditions, and best practices are a rich repository of the thinking and wisdom of those times. India's heritage and culture, as I said, is very deep, wide, and varied, but it has a strong strategic element and tradition. Now, what has happened in the past, at least in the years that I was growing up in India and in my period of service, these strategic elements, the hard power, these dimensions of our culture were for some reason de-emphasized. And the other regions, other aspects and domains were emphasized. That led to, I would say wrong assumptions, like George Stanham, if you heard, he came here in the 1980s and he made a wave by saying India lacks a strategic culture. India had a very strong strategic culture, but for some reason it was de-emphasized. And those are the aspects, which I would like to revisit with you. So India has not produced merely ethereal spiritual thinkers. We are very proud of them, spiritual thinkers. But we have also had some of the finest strategic minds, hard-nosed realists. Of course, India is a votary of peace. We are not expansionist. Our soft power is our hallmark. We are equally adept at deploying hard power in the national interest. And, as I said, it is this latter part that we will focus on. So just as the Western tradition has had its, Clausewitz, Homer, Thucydides, and we must pay heed to what they've said. Clausewitz is brilliant in many ways. Homer, we know he was the chronicler of the Trojan War. He spoke of how brute force and guile should come together. That was his claim to fame. We've had Thucydides. Now we know that Graham Allison's famous book. It gives you long history on how the resident power and the challenger have always fought it out. And I think he gives some 21 occasions. He recounts 21 occasions of the contest. In many, the challenger has won, and sometimes the resident power has continued to prevail. In the Sino-American context today, it is very relevant. He spoke of the conflicts between land power and sea power, the importance of finance and war fighting. So I'm saying the Western tradition is strong. So is the Chinese. I mean, one thing we have to admit about the Chinese, the chairman NDU, the Chinese chairman of the National Defense University in 2004 said, we are studying every word that Andrew Marshall has written. Andrew Marshall was who? He was a fine strategic mind who advised 8 presidents across the aisle in the United States of America. So the Chinese embraced the best of American Western practices, but never forgot the wisdom of Sun Tzu and Confucius. They have been wise in that sense. We have also had our Chanakyas. So let me give you, one saying from Chanakya, which emphasizes the correlation between cultural texts and the instrument of force. So it is in Hindi, but I will translate it in English for you too. He says, अगर शास्त्र को भूलोगे तो अपनी संस्कृति खो दोगे, पर अगर शस्त्र का त्याग करोगे, शस्त्र is the instrument of force, तो राष्ट्र ही खो दोगे. So he's emphasizing that we step into our culture always so that we develop a refined cultural outlook. That is what the Chinese have done. And if the Chinese are getting the better of the Americans today, it is because they continue to have faith in the strength of their culture, even as they adapted modern Western practices. अगर शस्त्र का त्याग करोगे तो राष्ट्र ही खो दोगे. We have to carefully see where we wish to position our instrument of force in our strategic calculus. Should it be peripheral? Should it be in the center? Should it be bang in the center? Now that would be a decision made by a host of factors: our cultural outlook, our current strengths, how the dominant political elites think. But Chanakya was emphasizing this whole aspect. And when you could compare him to, say, modern realists like Kissinger, Morgenthau, John Mersheimer, I find Chanakya even more clairvoyant. So those of us who wish to tap in these realist theories, here is Chanakya for you. And he was essentially arguing as to how military power must be the handmaiden of statecraft. And look at how wise he is. In 1990, Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. Meaning, no matter what you argue, ultimately in statecraft, it is the economy which matters. Today, everything tells you that it is national security, stupid. America is being challenged by China because it has let its military atrophy. It has the whole foreign policy of emphasis of America today is to make sure that they regain the military advantage. And they have neglected it. So see what has come to the mighty Americans. Look at their opera of failing deterrence. Act 1, Afghanistan. Act 2, Ukraine. Act 3, West Asia, where they are being challenged by the Houthis and the Iranians. Act 4, prospectively in Taiwan, because of neglect of Chanakya wisdom, neglect of the military instrument. So we must pay heed to what some of our people have said. When I grew up, we grew up on this myth that India was sea blind. Look at Shivaji. I mean, he's of course an exponent of guerrilla warfare and the power of asymmetry, but he had a 400-ship navy. He invested in ports, in a strong navy. It was, of course, to take care of, in those days, the cities of Janjira, which is a town in Raigad, a coastal district of Maharashtra, but he was an exponent of naval power. The Cholas invested in the maritime tradition and took our naval power to Malaya, to Sumatra. The Cholas also tell us that we were expeditionary. And I grew up in the year that we were always told that India is not expeditionary. Now, what is expeditionary? Expeditionary is not jackbooting around the world, but developing your military capacities so that you can apply them when the need so arises in pursuit of your national interests. Today, if our foreign policy and our strategic military stride, our economic flight and our strategic military flight, our stride are not calibrated, we'll be in trouble. If Dr. Jaishankar is talking of IMEC, all the way Middle East to Europe, INST, Chabahar now opens up that route to Russia. We are talking of the trilateral highway and even of linking Indo-Pacific with the trade route through West Asia to Europe, to Greece. If that is the grandeur of our economic and foreign policy ambitions, we must have a military to nurse it. And that will happen only if you start today. It will take 30, 40 years to create those capacities and power projection. And if you have to get inspired by all that, look at the Cholas, look at Shivaji. So, we must look at all these and all dogmas which don't make sense, just as we must repurpose to modern times, all dogmas which don't make sense must be dumped. I was referring to the Yuddhakundam. I was surprised. Look at this document, such an ancient document centuries ago, and it lays out how you must calibrate your force in diplomacy. Because foreign policy is a coin. One side it is force and the other side is diplomacy. George Shore says that negotiations are but a euphemism for capitulation unless the shadow of power is cast across the bargaining table. Unless the military gives leverage to diplomats, diplomacy will not move. Why are the talks in Galwan not moving ahead? Because we have no military leverage. So the Yuddhakundam talked of that, calibrating force and diplomacy. It talks of treaties, the Swarna Sandhi, the Adhisvistra Sandhi, the Karma Sandhi, the Apariparit Sandhi. and the Mitra Sandhi. Now, there's no time to go into the detail, but I'll just give you some examples. So, Karma Sandhi is the joint use of natural resources. So, perhaps it's something like the Indus Water Treaty between India and Pakistan. The Adistha Sandhi is when you trade territory for peace. Ayub Accord, the Pakistanis giving away Aksai to China. Now, these are modern day occurrences. The wisdom of that stretches back years. Look at the Ramayana. Now, I always thought the Ramayana was a religious text, but I'll just read out to you what the sage Narad has to say about Ram from the Ramayana, and he says there exists a perfect man, someone with heroic qualities, well versed in the duties of life, grateful, truthful, firm in his vows, actor of many parts, benevolent, learned, eloquent, patient, free of envy, slow to anger, yet can cause terror when excited to wrath. Now I'm quoting for Dr. Jaishankar's book, The India Way and Why Bharat Matters. You can interpret them in many ways. All the attributes that I have referred to are attributes of soldiering, honor, of being brave, and yet being extremely restrained. But when you cause terror, or somebody who can cause terror when excited to wrath, that is the character of Ram. It also can be interpreted to mean a powerful yet benign state. And I think that is the ideal aspiration for India. Powerful, restrained, and calibrated. If you cause terror, we can cause terror when excited to wrath. And the other interpretation of Dr. Jaishankar is that it is what? Ram Raj was such a perfect Raj. It was like the rules-based order of today. When we talk of an international rules-based order, which is respectful of sovereignties of nations, fair, it is all Ram Raj. So, and there are other things. You please study the Ramayana, if not the Ramayana, at least these two books. And there are a lot of takeaways. The Mahabharata, you see, we'll be speaking about the Arthashastra a little later. The Arthashastra lays out critical principles of governance. But the Mahabharata is rooted in real-time situations, in the frailties of human character. So it tells you how to deal with issues of war and peace, statecraft in a rich and complex world. It talks of balance of power. It talks of regime change. And of course, its most famous treatise is the Bhagavad Gita, which tells you, describes how you make ethical choices in a real world. Now, that's the beauty of Mahabharata. It is very, very easy to tell a child that, do this, don't do that. But life, the world is not about black and white. It comes in shades of gray. And when you make ethical choices in this gray world, you get a vivid distillation of Indian thoughts on statecraft. So these texts of ours, they must not be seen as religious texts. They have great cultural value. They have great lessons of statecraft. So the Indian officers here, you are in your mid-career. This is the right time to. Dr. Jaishankar has written on Bharat, the foreign policy dimension. Why don't one of you write on Bharat, the national security dimension? Interpret these texts and come out with very fine points of, on national security. And the international officers, Mahabharata, I will just quote to you Arthashastra a little later, but Mahabharata and Ramayana are of, what shall I say, global quality. If you get some English translations, do study them. They will be they carry as much wisdom as Homer's Iliad. You must. Look at our Sikh gurus. I'll just quote you one. The Sikh tradition, martial tradition, Guru Tegh Bahadur says, Bal hoye, bandhan chhute, sab kuch lage upay, which means that when strength accrues, shackles snap, every move seems a stratagem. This is what China is doing today. China has built its military power to such an extent that today it doesn't need to use it. It doesn't need to use it. Just the threat of use, or the possible use of military power, sorts out all its problems. This is what perhaps Guru Tegh Bahadur was saying. Create such power, create such strength, that every move you make, the world wonders what you are doing. And of course, it should be benign. This can also form the basis of modern day deterrence. Deterrence is, of course, a peaceful tool. The logic of deterrence is that invest in military capacity so much that we don't have war. So deterrence is costly, but wars are costlier. You don't believe me? Ask the Ukrainians. So there are so many of these lessons. And if deterrence matters, let me leave a piece of statistic with you. The Chinese just announced their defense budget, and their defense budget grew from the last year by 7.2%. Their economy is growing only 3%. Some say 2%, some say half. On the other hand, our defense budget is just below 2%. Our economy is growing at 7%, 8%. So are the Chinese callous or are the Indians wise? Are the Chinese wise that they are securing their strategic military futures? And are we underspending on defense when we can afford more? All these arguments can be linked. And see, what does power do? Your friends, your allies will follow you only if you have the power and prosperity to advance their common interests. If you don't have the power and prosperity to advance common interests, your power will inspire resentment and not respect. So this is the whole logic of power. Look at the Rajput martial tradition. It's a different kind. It emphasizes honor, valor. It also emphasizes women as valorous. We know of Padmavati. They have a saying in the Rajput Marwari tradition which says that Rajputni ki kangan mein utni hi taakat hai jitne ki Rajput ki talwar mein. So the sword that the male carries is just as powerful as the kangan. It is a form of jewelry which the bride wears. And we know that whole sati pratha and all, they have a strong martial logic. Indian tradition has been of great valor, but it has unfortunately also been of the loser. So we've had Porus, Rani Lakshmibai, Mahabharat, who were very valorous, but they were not victorious. They all lost their battles. The one Indian general who was valorous and victorious was Lieutenant General Sagat Singh. Do read his book, The Talent for War. He was a gifted military genius. Every war that he fought, that he won. Goa, Nathula, the Mizo insurgency, and finally the dash for Dhaka. I was surprised that the London Times of that era, 1971, compared Sagat's dash to Dhaka with the Blitzkrieg. That's a huge compliment. General Sagat was compared with General Patton. That is military genius. So you have all kinds of genius in our history. Porus, Rani Lakshmibai, Mahabharat, very valorous, unfortunately not victorious. Sagat is valorous and victorious. General Sagat and Sam Manekshaw, I've done a video on this, those of you who have the time to watch it, Sam and Sagat. The jugalbandi between them, Sam Manekshaw and Sagat Singh, led to our rejuvenation against the Chinese. There's no time to go into the details, but I'm just trying to give you across the spread of history the great traditions we've had. There is the Tamil poet, philosopher Thiruvalluvar. I have not read it. I have just read some excerpts here and there. But people have compared him to Shakespeare, not only because of his skills in poetry, but because of his deep thoughts on economy, on strategic military affairs. So I'm saying, by all means, read Clausewitz, read Kissinger, read Mersheimer, but don't get overawed, because your own heroes have been greater. And much of what they tell you, your heroes have been telling. So do take some time to read them. We spoke of the Arthashastra. Now here is the quote of Sunil Khilnani. He says, the realism of the Arthashastra makes Machiavelli's prince look harmless. That's a huge tribute. We've all heard of Machiavelli, and we've heard of that great treatise that he churned out, The Prince, which is all about wile and guile and cunning, hard power. And this is how Sunil Khilnani describes the Arthashastra, and why not? The Arthashastra is all about the science of material gain, hard power, economics, technology, and power. We were saying Indians are only spiritual thinkers. Bloody nonsense. We also have great thinkers on all this, hard power. The Arthashastra focuses on worldly ends, advocates ruthless means to achieve and maintain power. Ruthless. Its conception of power is the convergence of military power, guile, cunning, and deceit. We make this argument that, the Chinese deceived us in Galwan. They did. They violated the agreements. But next time, that should not be the question. We should not get deceived. Why should we get deceived? Deception is built into statecraft. So we have to be wise. This is what the Arthashastra tells us. The Arthashastra compares a nation state to an iceberg. The part of the iceberg that towers above, says Kautilya, must be a beacon of majestic power, strong economy, adept in technology, strong military, majestic power. He says that which is hidden from sight, jo niche hai, that must embody secrecy, duplicity, manipulation, and surveillance. So cover tops are legitimate. Of course, you can't talk about them. Just as CIA and Mossad are eulogized, so should we have a very fine draw? Because this happens. These are the realist traditions of statecraft. We spoke of the Yuddhakandam. The Yuddhakandam has a lovely phrase, Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed. We all have heard of it. In the foreign policy sense, it means national interest by means fair or foul. I will emphasize foul. Now that foul bit is actually wisdom. It is that exercise of, it's not jackbooting around the world. It's not that kind of stuff. It is exercising the writ of the state when it is challenged, because unfortunately in the international system, there is no higher hierarchy than the nation state. Institutions like the United Nations are toothless. So power is the final arbiter. Now that power must be benign, it must be thoughtful, it must be restrained. But it has to have these tools which must only be deployed in the national interests. Surprisingly, much of this wisdom in foreign policy has also come from our street poets. They have not necessarily come from our elite colleges and from Lutyens' Delhi. Those of you from the Hindi-speaking belt, Uttar Pradesh in particular, where I am from, would have heard of a poet called Ramdhari Singh Dinkar. And look at his wisdom in high matters of foreign policy and statecraft. He says, "Sach pucho to shar mein hi basti hai deepti vinay ki. Sach pucho to shar mein hi basti hai deepti vinay ki. Sandhi vachan sampooj usikha jisme shakti vijay ki." So, what it means, when translated succinctly, is that power and strength induce good behavior, deepti vinay ki, and the victor gets all the spoils. Now, this is coming not from Kissinger or Morgenthau, somebody who's been schooled in elite institutions, but a street poet. So the point that I'm making is that India, since it has had a rich oral tradition, and it has been such an old and diverse civilization, you will get this kind of wisdom in your Gram Panchayats, in street poets like Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, in Kautilya, from institutions like Nalanda, across the region, the Sikh tradition, the Maratha tradition. It's a repository there. Any of you can take all this and converge it into a document, which can be used to define India's unique strategic outlook. One that is, of course, not ignorant of Western traditions. It doesn't dismiss everything that is modern, but can take all that is modern, the good points from the West, and dip it into our civilizational sauce. You will produce a document that is authentic and which is very, 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 very Indian. I may also tell you that I would like to emphasize the duopoly of Indian thought. We all talk of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That is only one part. Indian strategic thought is a twin-engine statecraft. While Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is, of course, very noble, very benign, and talks of India's aspiration for a peaceful, united world, one earth, one family, one future, Indians are equally cognizant of the hardball. We are not fools. Look at what Swami Vivekananda said. He said, the world is but a gymnasium where nations come to make themselves strong. So Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is the aspiration, and he cautions you. But the world is a gymnasium where nations come to make themselves strong. In recognition of the reality that I was alluding to, that in the Indian international system, there is no hierarchy, the final arbiter is power. So India should not be coy about being powerful. We should not be coy about being powerful. And of course, here I'm not making an argument just for military power. Power, as we all know, lies at the intersect of an economically prosperous India, and skilled India, and technologically enabled India, in India, whose soft power is sought after, whose cultural traditions are envied. So that kind of power. But we have to don't get carried away by just one argument. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is one argument. Here is Swami Vivekananda warning you in explicit terms about the other. Look at our concepts of non-alignment and strategic economy. They are also very germane to Indian strategic thought. Even when we were weak, we mustered the moral strength to stay clear of either camp in the Cold War. When we were weak, it was very easy to jump into one camp, but we did not. We chose the harder way. And now that we are stronger, we exercise independent choice through the instrument of strategic autonomy. Our national interest. So, in doing so, we wish to become a unique pole in the international system, a leading power of a unique kind. Now, it doesn't mean that there are no challenges here. For example, today, we have to realistically see, are we over-dependent on Russia in terms of arms and equipment and so on and so forth? Will Russia be an effective counterweight to China? Now, all these propositions have to be continuously examined. Russia has been a great friend, a very reliable friend. While our relationship with the Russians has to be cherished, can our relationship with the Americans be spectacular? This needs very adroit deployment of our understanding of strategic autonomy. This business you would be hearing of Vishwa Bandhu. See, it is very important to be a friend to the world. And this Vishwa Bandhu call is nestled in pragmatism. As I was saying, you cannot have IMEC, you cannot have INSTC, you cannot have the trilateral highway without multiple friends and partners. So you have to be friends with the world. When it comes to technologies like semiconductors, green energy, electric mobility, you need deep collaborative pathways. Let me give you an example. A semiconductor, they say, from sand to finished product, the whole process passes through a mind-boggling 64 countries. So there can simply be no self-sufficiency in semiconductors. All that we are doing, semiconductor mission and all that will happen only if we have friends, if we have partners. So unless India is a Vishwa Bandhu, it can never become a Vishwa Guru. And so all these terms that you hear of, you will see that they are taken from some of our cultural text, that business is understood and then deployed. For example, Amrit Kaal. Amrit Kaal is just not that very suddenly our stars have come together and now India is destined to greatness. But Amrit Kaal has a very strong economic logic. Amrit Kaal tells you that, it does seem to be India's moment in many ways. We are the fifth largest economy. We could become the third. But it is telling you that act fast in speed and scale. Because your reproductive rates are dipping now. We do have a demographic challenge. That rate will dip to 1.9 by 2047 or so. So please, if you have to get rich, make sure you get rich before you grow old. Therefore, Amrit Kal, therefore those next 25 years being so important. So I will very strongly urge you, when you take these terms, study them in depth and see what they mean. And then if you understand them, you will be able to use them in ways. We were talking of power projection. One was, of course, the Chola tradition. We all heard of the Ashwamedh Yagya. What was the Ashwamedh Yagya? Ashwamedh Yagya was, when a king, a reigning king, would let loose his horse accompanied by warriors, and it would go along the periphery of the kingdom, then the next circle and the next circle. That was power projection. What was the logic of power projection? The logic of power projection was that project your power either through alliances or through friendships or through a military threat or capacity in being. Because if you don't project your power outwards, the threats will land on your doorstep. Now that was the logic for Andaman Nicobar Command. The logic was that you should be able to project military power across the Strait of Malacca. And then somehow we forgot the overarching logic and we started defending every inch of Andaman Nicobar Islands. That was not the purpose. I am told that we can't project power. We cannot control a strait. Well, the Houthis somehow managed to control the Red Sea. The Iranians do it in the Strait of Hormuz. I'm saying build your capacities. Whether you do it or not is a different matter. But if you don't have capacities, you can't even ask the question. Look at the Americans. What a smart system they use. They take talent from all over the world, so they are never affected by adverse demographics. A young Indian, a young Chinese, a young African is always building technologies from them in the universities. It is creating wealth. Then they use that wealth to create more technologies. They use their wealth to nurse military power. And they have 800 bases, $950 billion, 11 aircraft carriers to protect American interests around the globe. It allows their traders the freedom to roam the globe. So unless you have a very well thought through strategy in this sense of military muscle, power projection, talent, all this business, you will not grow. Which brings me to the next point of civil-military fusion. You see, the India I grew up in was civil-military silos. We were said, no, civil alag, military alag. So ISRO kamal kar raha tha, but military mein space istemal nahi ho. It is absolute, if it doesn't sound rude, stupidity. Today, China is where it is because it has very adeptly practiced military civil fusion. The Americans are coming back with civil-military fusion now. They are talking of civil-military fusion. And lo behold, our ancient text told us, Saraswati, Lakshmi or Durga ka samavesh. What does it mean? It says have huge, great centers of learning, great centers of research and development, Saraswati, the goddess of learning. Use that wisdom to create wealth, Lakshmi. And use some of that Lakshmi to nurse instruments of power. Look what our ancient philosophers told us and how we messed it up by these civil-military silos. And today, if we haven't really taken off in technologies and all these issues, it is because of these silos. Thankfully, now that has been reversed, and we are now talking of civil-military fusion. Link it to what I told you about Saraswati, Lakshmi, Durga. So these are all the consequences of not having faith in our own cultural texts. Let me also, this business of Mahatma Gandhi, was his non-violence philosophy in eternity? Or was that non-violence should be viewed in a certain context? I think it is to be viewed in a certain context. It is not a fixity. Because I often hear this, India is the land of the Mahatma, it is non-violent. Of course, against the very powerful British Empire, you could not throw them out by violent means. So he devised a very clever strategy. You know, it says a life in 3 campaigns: the non-cooperation movement, the salt satyagraha, and finally quit India. They were actually campaigns to throw out the British, but devised very carefully and necessarily peaceful because we didn't have the muscle. But look at his attitude to the instrument of force. I'll give you 3 examples. In 1918, the Mahatma nearly lost his life while recruiting soldiers from Gujarat for the British Army, World War I. In 1947 and 48, when the Pak intruders came into Kashmir, the Mahatma said, "March ahead and repel the attacking enemy." He was endorsing the instrument of force. Look at what he says about Bhagat Singh. Bhagat Singh, of course, we know Bhagat Singh. He was one of the rock stars of the violent dimension of our independence movement. He says heroes like him had conquered the fear of death. Mahatma Gandhi is describing him as a hero. Let us bow to him for his heroism. So Mahatma Gandhi is not against violence. He's not against the legitimate use of violence. And therefore that whole deduction that India is a land of peace, we will not develop a nourished instrument of force because the Mahatma told us, is a bogus argument. This business also, hame mili, hame azadi, bina khadak, bina dal, is not true. Of course, non-violence was a very shrewd, in fact, a brilliant instrument to unsettle the British and get our independence. But it would not have happened without the contributions of people like Bhagat Singh and Subhash Chandra Bose, ultimately the naval mutiny. We know what the British Viceroy said after the naval mutiny. He finally realized that the time of the British was up in India when the naval mutiny up. So we should not allow, what shall I say, siloed versions of history to come in the way of fast strategic thought. I'll just make 2 more quick points and then we'll end. One is, this business of rules and dharma. This is a very good point from our texts. So our texts tell us that niyam hai or dharma hai. Niyam are petty. What we must follow necessarily is not niyam, but the larger dharma. And this lesson comes from the Mahabharata. So Duryodhan wins the game of dice. तो नियम के अनुसार जब आप विजेता हैं उस खेल में, तो जो भी दुश्मन का है वो आपका है. नियम. Now what is crooked नियम? तो जो दुश्मन का है वो आपका है, तो द्रौपदी भी आपकी. Petty rule. What is the larger dharma? And that takes us to Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna's, उनका जो वर्चस्व है, his unique persona is that he bends rules to uphold dharma. I make this point in the context of what the Indian armed forces have got entrapped in. Har cheez mein rule. When you know the rule doesn't make sense, quote the rule. If you quote the rule in that sense, you are being Duryodhan. Now we need Krishnas, those who can intelligently bend rules to uphold the dharma. We also need Yudhishthir's who are, struggling to be Ram in the framework of the niyam, petty rules. But certainly we don't need Duryodhans. And I make this point in the context of BPP and all. We are copying flopping Western models. Kindly jump them. Look at the extreme example. From 2014, every intelligent man in America and the West knew that Putin was up to some trick in Ukraine. There were all kinds of Georgia, then Donbass, his speeches, all kinds of things. And look, what did the mighty West and the mighty Americans do to deter them? All this DPP, huge demographic debates, all about rules. Rule ki wajah se ye nahi ho sakta, rule ki wajah se wo nahi ho sakta, and see what happened. Ultimately, Advikta was a city or a small town which fell, I think, about 2-3 months back in Ukraine. The Russians captured Advikta. And I'm quoting the CIA Director William Burns, so it's not an antagonistic argument. Burns said that before they took the call to abandon Advikta, they carried out an audit of the Ukrainian brigades there. One brigade had 15 artillery rounds left. The other artillery brigade had 42 mortar rounds. So did they lose or did you betray them? All because of your fancy rules, Niyam, TPP. No wonder Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference in exasperation, while addressing the Western leaders, said that enemy artillery does not fall silent because of the complexity of your rules and procedures. When the Western leaders were telling him, see, our rules are so complex, what can we do? The argument that I make is that in our duel with China, we should have a careful look at our military-industrial complex. Come 2028, we should not come to a position, I'm not saying it's going that way, but we should be cautious, where we are in the same condition of those two infantry brigades, 15 artillery rounds and 42 mortar rounds. It will be a very lazy excuse based on all this niyam. And therefore, the time has come to jump certain issues. For example, we tell these private sector guys ki, aap karo produce, L1 ko hum dekhenge 10 saal baad. Koi nahi lagayega paisa. There has to be firm demand signaling. The complete West encourages national champions. Boeing, Lockheed, South Korean companies, Chinese companies, they get firm orders. This business of L1 just has to go. It has been structured on that Niyam narrative. Must be thrown out of the window. So, these are the realistic things that we have to do. Our texts tell us outcomes and not process, Lord Krishna. And we have got trapped in these Western models. So do take, note of all these issues, or just consider some of these issues that I have raised. So in sum, I'll just say that I've just given you a sprinkling of examples in the limited time. Our texts are gloriously rich, extremely wise, very thoughtful. They are ripe for adaptation to modern times. So the Indian officers in particular, you must do it and develop a very unique strategic outlook, as I said, which is modern, but which is dipped in civilizational sauce. It will make your outlooks unique. And if your outlooks are unique, you will win the respect of even the West, possibly that of the Chinese. But if your outlooks are not unique, in fact, I would make this argument that when your texts are so deep, it will be foolish to ignore them. And since I'm speaking to you, I'd just like to make one point. This in the Sino-Indian challenge, while we are doing pretty well in the dimension of territorial combat, LAC and all that, though there also we could do more. Two glaring areas of inadequacy are strategic deterrence and power projection. Strategic deterrence is, our AD network, drone missile force, cyber force. Do study the Ukrainian conflict. They are glaring lessons. Ukraine, is both cyber warfare, tank warfare, trench warfare. Data, the way data has become a weapon system. So do study all these things in the context of our the China threat. I think I'll call it quits now. I've given you my thoughts. If there are any questions, anything you wish to say, it will be a pleasure to hear you. Thank you. I finished, Jim. Come on, somebody, some questions, some good ideas. Let's hear. Yeah, please. No.
Take a mic.
A very good morning to you, sir. This is Group Captain Jai Singh Brad from the Indian Air Force. Firstly, as you rightly said, अगर शास्त्र गया तो शासन भी जाएगा और the country will lose its shastra rather. Correction for that. Now coming on to my question, sir. We very well know that we have to carry our essence of the past, our rich traditions and strategic outlook, but there has been a gap in between. Now, bridging that gap by action and hard power, like China on the other side is growing economically and it is pacing up very nicely to have that deterrence in its military domains. My first question is, how and who is going to bring out this revolution in military affairs in the context of India? And my second question is that the growth rate which we get of 7%, does it straddle on a kind of a compensation, or firstly not building up in the hard power and the people of the nation having a very low level of social security, because a comprehensive power cannot be ignored by not investing in a kind of lesser heterogeneity within the nation itself.
Okay, so who will do it? You and me. There's nobody else who will do it. See, look, what is the challenge? You look at the elections today. I always wonder. There are many ideas, there are many rights, there are many wrongs, but the party that wins is that which can carry this narrative to the voter. So that is what we have to do in the national security sense. Write, persuade. Those of you who are in service, do by example. Make attempts. You make 10 attempts, 4 you will fail, 6 you will succeed. When you are outside, speak, write. All this makes a difference. But you never know what makes a difference. So that is the first thing. What you believe in, you must do. This is how it will happen. Persuasion, writing, influencing, and when you are in service, acting, if you believe in it. Do also act. The rewards of action are far greater than inaction. I can tell you by personal example. You will find mentors and friends from strange quarters if you act. Our problem is in being too careful. So that is the first point I would like to. The second point, just see why I keep emphasizing these Western models. In the years that I grew up, or in the military, say 2005 onwards, there was this economy stupid argument which every economist in India just adapted, unquestioningly. And the overarching narrative was, defense mein to lagana bekar hai. You have to first grow economically. Is that a fact? I'll give you examples. The Americans, World War II, spent 50% of their GDP on defense. And it came down. In the Cold War, it was 6%. Reagan took it to 9%. When he took it to 9%, Soviet Union crumbled. And then because the Americans themselves neglected their defense, they are paying the price. They are paying the price. Mark Milley, when he was being interrogated by a congressional committee, was giving reasons on why Putin attacked. And one of the congressmen tells him, General, don't make excuses. Tell us why your deterrence failed. Why should we spend $950 billion, give you 11 aircraft carriers, have 800 bases if all we have to hear is excuses? Do we want to hear these same questions? So we just have to believe in your own judgment. Go to these texts. They don't tell you only the economy. Force the economy. But you also have to secure ourselves. This was the logic from 47 to 62. What did 62 do? It threw your economy back by 20 years. So deterrence is costly, wars are costlier. Look at Taiwan. Of course. Why is it important to spend on deterrence in Taiwan? If you don't spend, and there is a conflict in Taiwan, given the whole issue of advanced chips and supply chain resilience, the global economy will be thrown back by $10 trillion. That is mind-boggling. So this argument that till our people come, defense versus development is an entirely false argument. Development you must do. And there are other arguments also. I gave you that 7% logic. The other logic also, please hear. America spends three times more on defense than China. China spends 3 times more on defense than India. So the differential is same, about 3 times roughly. Why is it that Beijing is causing displacement anxiety in Washington and we cause no displacement anxiety in Beijing? Because of lack of reforms elsewhere, structural, cultural, all this. So a symmetric addressal argument tells you that we have to restructure. अगर हम structurally change नहीं करेंगे, theater command नहीं बढ़ाएंगे, culturally नहीं करेंगे, L1 Shell1 nonsense. If we just keep aping the West, if we just keep their flopping models, we will meet a similar fate. And just study carefully what China, Russia, Iran, and Korea are doing. Could you imagine a country like Korea would come to the rescue of Russia through artillery munition? आज देखो क्या हाल है वहां पे. The Americans today have realized that it's an artillery war, so they decided to beef up the artillery production. And they have gathered all that they can, and they have come to the conclusion that they will be able to give Ukraine only 1.5 million rounds per month by end of 2025. What are the Russians? What is the Russian production today? 5 million rounds per month. Is it any surprise that the Russians are winning? Iranians, country under sanctions, set up a drone factory of low-cost drones in Tatarstan. Use those drones there, the data that was available in Ukraine, and have used the same drones to brilliant effect on 14th April. A country under sanctions. So defense, there is all kinds of stuff you can do, asymmetry, precision. Look at the Russian Air Force. For 2 years, they were left out of battle because there was a paucity of precision munitions and their dumb munitions were not precise. It took them 2 years to make those glide bombs precise, and they caused devastating effect in Advicta. So it's not that air power is declined. Air power has to constantly transform and mutate. I'm giving you a sense of the challenges involved there, how you must think on your feet. And so many of these don't just ape what somebody tells you. Look at these things with a fresh mind, and so many things, good things can happen. And if you don't, there will be consequences. So that you and I have to do it. The things are very obvious. And if we don't do it, we will suffer.
Jansam, Colonel Dipankar.
Yeah, Deepak.
Sir, now that you've seen both the realms as the military and now, of course, you've been with the UPSC since 2022. What do you think is the future of the civil-military fusion from the civilian perspective? I mean, in the military, I think we look forward to it. We were looking forward to having Hindu coming up. But what is the civilian perspective towards it? Are they ready for it?
See, what has changed is you look at the CDS DNA. I was DGPP when the CDS, they were formulating what kind of CDS and all that we need. And I know the recommendations that went from the army to the government. They were pretty non-ambitious. And that was a product of years of thinking. ये भी नहीं हो सकता, CDS कैसे पावरफुल होगा, MOD इंटीग्रेशन हमने कहा सवाल ही नहीं है यार, मेजर डाल दो वहां पे. No, they will not accept. Bureaucracy was saying that no, we will not accept this. Look what happened. You got the most powerful CDS on earth. It's more powerful than Barry Goldwater Nichols. They said, "Aap chodo MOD integration, department de law." Having got this, what have we made of it? What has changed, I'm telling you, in my understanding, the politician is telling both the civil and military bureaucracies that please settle your disputes. We want defense to grow, the country to grow. If the military was out, we are empowering you. But now that we have empowered you, please deliver. Empowering is just not to sit on it. So this is civil military fusion. So many things have happened in the civil space. You see how the military has You find military officers speaking at various forums and all. It never happened in the past. A chief would give a statement, and Indian Express or some paper would headline loose cannons. There were very clever ways to constrict the military. I'm not saying it is ideal. For example, on Agniveer, we can have different parts. I think it's a very good scheme. Some may not. The Indu could be, one area. But there are many other areas. Atmanirbharta in defense, get the private sector going, get startups going. So many of these areas. Since this is an in-house audience, let me ask, what are the material things that we have delivered since when we have got empowered? Data commands was the concept of the 90s. We should be talking of digital theaters, data leveraging, data talking to data. We should have had a cyber force, and I'm not talking of a grand cyber force, but a drone force. Look at the state of our AD. What saved the Israelis that day was Iron Dome, Arrow 1, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, David Slingshot, fighters from UK, fighters from the USA, the interceptions that they carried out. Ask us honestly, is our AD so robust? I have my very severe doubts. So all these areas we can firstly converge with civil. As Army Commander, when I took over, Army Commander Artrack, I was surprised to discover that the Army Commander Artrack had powers of 15 crores per project to be given to any civilian entity, startup, private sector, anybody for research and induction. This was set up by General Shammi Mehta, a very visionary kind of army commander, and then it had not been used. Now, because of the pressures of what was happening, in my first year, we spent 7 crores. The year I moved out, it was 155 crores. Many of those startups whom I gave first orders are today unicorns. They're talking in thousands of crores. Some of them have got contracts with US companies. It's a civil military fusion. And civil military fusion is what? Talents, attributes of any kind, startup, private sector, DRDO if it is good. See, it is not an argument for capitalism. The Chinese SOEs have done as well. So if the DRDOs and our DPSUs do well, no problem. But they need reform. They need talent. So the driver behind civil military fusion is talent of any kind. You ask UPSC. So the government for the last 3 years has started lateral induction 100 per year. Things like JS digital diplomacy, JS cyber, JS green energy. I have taken the same proposal and given it to people in the MOD and said, get 5 people in the MOD, JS AI, JS quantum, whatever you want. People, and these posts are banned to central government employees. So it can only be from the private sector and people of those domains. So it can happen day after tomorrow, if we wish to do it. And if you don't wish to, firstly, it's happening in the civil street. It befuddles me, why don't we do it? Just this can start next week. And people are doing it. Look what the Americans are doing. To drive AI through the Pentagon, they haven't appointed a 3-star, they haven't appointed a civil servant, they have got Craig Martel. What was Craig Martel doing? He was doing AI for a cab company, Lyft. So if you look around you, see all these things that are happening, why can they not happen not only in the Ministry of Defense? So civil military fusion is a great way to go forward. Now, I will just advise you young officers, or middle peace officers, sorry, I shouldn't be calling you young, is that, see, there will be some areas of convergence and there will be some areas of divergence. Don't pick the areas of divergence and pick up a quarrel. Pick up the areas of convergence. So, these unme karo. And then come to these areas of divergence. I mean, Hindu, I agree with you, but it cannot be the only argument. There are so many other pathways that have been opened up. So much is happening in that civil military space. We need to give it speed and scale. Yeah, anybody else? Come on, one last question. You must ask. Don't ask, you will not. Anybody else? Yeah.
Sir, good morning to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us today. In fact, the group has just returned yesterday from their forward area come cultural tour of 2 weeks, spanning across Mumbai, Pune, Hyderabad, Leh, Delhi, and Varanasi, sir. Well, that could be one reason, but nonetheless, thank you so much, sir. Officers, the importance of history. I think that was what he started with. That, well, if we forget our roots, any nation that does that has no future. So there lies the important lessons, and of course the connect from the Western strategists to Clausewitz, Homer, on to Chinese, to the Americans, and finally the Indian examples. I think that was a very interesting and a very relevant connect. I think we ought to take our lessons from there. Uh, he also highlighted the maritime orientation of a country which has a old civilization connect from the time of Cholas and Shivaji, as you have heard some of the previous guest speakers speaking on that, and the fact that today geoeconomics drives geopolitics. So, and then he compared the growth rates and the percentages devoted to defense, the differential between US, China, and India. The fact is that US and China have the same differential what China and India have, and yet the Chinese seem to be having an edge because of superior statecraft or orientation as of now. I think this, as India is rising as a nation state, I think one very important point was, gentlemen, the capacities and capabilities take time. Unless we realize the responsibilities that will come of us and start preparing it for now, when the situation arises or we reach a stage, we'll find ourselves inadequately prepared for that. And this eternal debate of bread versus butter would continue. However, I think the government of the day is quite seized with that. The two important facets have already been highlighted in the past, in terms of foreign policy and military. How do you balance out between the two of them? With power, remember, comes a great responsibility. So thank you so very much for giving the host of examples in terms of the international rule-based orders and the attributes of statehood from Indian mythology and in old crafts. We take your suggestion very seriously on Bharat. We'll encourage the course members of the coming higher command course, sir. We have been working on the ancient Indian statecraft, but now to connect it and contextualize in the contemporary and emerging challenges and how we can have the evolved national security outlook is what we are working on from this course onwards, sir. So hopefully we'll get more articles in the open on this particular facet. Gentlemen, very important facet of deterrence and credibility. That, of course, deterrence costs, but when you don't invest in it, wars, as we have seen or we are seeing, are far, far more costlier. I think that was a very important lesson that was given here. And of course, statecraft is about whole of nation approach, is about comprehensive national power. While there is no substitute at the end, what really derives the final arbitrator, as he said, is the hard power. So that, again, examples from Indian mythology and others. The fact is, despite everything, from our nascency, India adopted the policy of a non-aligned status or retained the strategic autonomy. I think you can't have a better example of statecraft evolving and the continued civilizational connect from the ancient times on that account. So here we are poised from the position of a Vishwa Bandhu, that is the world's friend or global friend, to Vishwa Guru. I think this transition, military has a very important role, and as the emerging senior military leadership, all of you have a much more important role to play here. I think very important facets of civil military fusion. Thank you so very much, sir, for that. I had a very realistic perspective of Mahatma Gandhi's, ideology. We only identify with one particular thread of non-violence, but that was not the only one. So I'm grateful that he contextualized that part of it. And of course, the Niyam versus Dharma, that is rule versus the statecraft. Rules are for the subordinates. As leaders, we are supposed to be interpreting them and looking at the larger context of it. And hence, I think that is where the essence was, that in all of us to have a non-status quoist approach. And the self-belief can only come about if we do more reading, more reflection, and articulate our thoughts. That's the only way ahead. And as India rises, I think we will have to look at Indian solutions for Indian challenges with an innovative approach. So at the end, on behalf of the War College and the Higher Defense Orientation course members and self, sir, thank you so very much for taking out time from your extremely busy committed schedule, sir, and such an enriching interaction. Greatly appreciate, sir. As always, it's a very wide subject, but in a short time, I think the sprinkling of examples or illustrations, I think very well contextual. Greatly appreciate that, sir. May I request the course member to please join me in conveying appreciation. Thank you, sir.